Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be talking about something pretty important today. Uh, AI explainability,
Ah, yes, XAI.
XAI, and specifically we're going to be looking at how the EU's proposed AI Act might actually affect, you and your work. We've got a pretty diverse stack of information to go through, um, research papers, legal stuff. We even found a taxonomy of AI.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're going deep on this one to make sure that you're in the know.
It's great to be here. I think you're right. This is such a fast-moving field, and it's really interesting to see the EU taking such a strong stance with this act.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's get down to the basics.
Yeah.
What even is explainable AI? I think I
Hmm.
get the general idea. We don't want AI to just be a black box, right?
Okay.
We want to be able to understand the decisions that it makes. But what are we talking about here specifically?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The need for XAI has really taken off because of all of these increasingly complex AI models that we're seeing now, especially in some of these, high stakes fields like what you work with medical diagnoses. Imagine, an AI is flagging a potential issue in a patient scan.
Yeah,
Well, you're going to want to know WHY. It's raising that flag right. That's where XAI comes in.
that makes total sense. And I think, for me, it's not even just about trusting the AI. It's about actually being able to use its insights effectively in my work. So how do we even define explainability?
Hmm.
It seems like a pretty slippery concept.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, even defining the terms that we're using in this field can be really tricky. There are a lot of different opinions on what exactly explainability and interpretability actually mean. So, to give us a little structure, we can look at a taxonomy that was proposed by a researcher called Zachary Lipton. And he breaks this down into transparency and post hoc interpretability.
I love good taxonomy.
Oh,
It's
I
not for
have.
organization. What do those terms mean?
So imagine you're throwing a party and you've built an AI to choose the guest list. Transparency means that you can see the general criteria that this AI is using. Maybe it's considering factors like how well someone knows the other guests,
Right.
their interests, or even, how likely they are to bring snacks.
Okay.
But post hoc interpretability is like getting specific explanations after the AI has already sent out the invites. So you could go to the AI and you could ask it, hey, why wasn't so and so invited?
Hmm.
And then the AI could give you specific reasons based on, that person's data.
So transparency is kind of like, knowing the rules of the game, and then post hoc is like understanding the specific calls that are made during the game.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, where does the EU's AI Act fit into all of this?
Okay, so that's where things get really, really interesting. The EU is kind of leading the way when it comes to regulating AI, and this act could actually set a precedent globally. And one of its key focuses is this idea of post hoc explanation, especially for high risk AI systems like the ones that you're working with.
Okay, so we're not just talking about, theoretical debate anymore. This is about to become law. What does the Act actually say about explainability?
Well, the act takes what they call a risk based approach. Article 13, which is kind of the heart of the XAI requirements in this act, states that these high risk systems need to be transparent enough so that users like you can understand the outputs and then, of course, properly use them in their work.
Yeah, that makes sense, but properly use them seems pretty vague. I mean, how much information am I required to give to my patients, for example, based on, what the AI tells me?
You've hit on a very tricky point. The Act is intentionally vague on how exactly we are supposed to achieve this explainability. It doesn't give us any specific methods or like levels of detail that we need to hit. And this has caused a lot of debate, actually. Some experts like Ebers and Hacker and Passoff have even criticized the Act for its lack of clarity.
Yeah, I see their point. I mean, it puts a lot of responsibility on developers like me to figure out how to comply. Is there anything in the Act that gives more concrete guidance?
Well, the European Parliament is actually pushing for more clarity on this. They want both the system and its results to be understandable, not just to experts like you, but to the average person.
So my patients would need to understand the AI's reasoning as well. That's pretty ambitious.
It is, and they do acknowledge that, sometimes a perfect explanation may just not be possible. And in those cases, the AI needs to be upfront about those limitations. It's definitely a complex issue, and finding that balance is going to be key.
Okay, so we've established that the Act wants explainable AI, especially for these high-risk applications.
Mm.
But how do we actually measure explainability? Is there some way to quantify, how transparent an AI is?
That's a great question. I mean, is there some kind of, explainability meter we can use?
I wish it were that easy.
Mm.
Researchers are working on ways to quantify explainability, but it really is still a work in progress. There's
Yep.
no like single universally accepted metric just yet.
So how do we figure out if an AI is explainable enough to meet these requirements? It kind of seems like a subjective judgment call. Right. Well, that's where it gets interesting. Those socio-technical and technical metrics we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Each of those offers different lenses for evaluating XAI.
Okay, so let's say I'm building an AI system for medical diagnoses. How would I actually USE these metrics in my development process?
All right, well, let's start with the social metrics, which really focus on, the human experience. Think about your patients. Can they actually understand the AI's explanation for a particular diagnosis?
Okay.
Do they trust the AI's reasoning?
So instead of just assuming that they will, I could actually, test that out. What would that look like in practice?
That's exactly right. You could conduct user tests to see how well patients are grasping the AI's explanations. You could even measure things like their satisfaction with the explanations or assess, how well they can predict the AI's next steps
Right.
based on, what it's communicated.
So it's like checking to see if the AI's reasoning is consistent and understandable enough that the user can actually follow along.
Exactly. It's not just about giving an explanation. It's about making sure that explanation is actually meaningful to the people who need it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, how about those socio-technical metrics? What role do they play in evaluating XAI?
Well, these metrics focus on the usability of the XAI tools themselves. The interface between that complex AI and you, the user,
Okay.
the tools that actually make the AI's decisions accessible.
So it's not just about the AI spitting out some explanation. It's about how that explanation is presented and how easily I can use it to understand what's going on.
Exactly. Imagine you're using an XAI tool to understand, why the AI flagged a potential issue in a patient's scan. You would want that tool to be intuitive, easy to navigate.
Yeah.
You want to be able to quickly find the information you need without getting bogged down in all the technical jargon.
It sounds like user-centered design is super important here.
It's crucial. The effectiveness of XAI depends not just on the technical sophistication of the explanations, but also how seamlessly those explanations are integrated into the user's workflow.
Okay, that covers social and socio-technical. Now, what about those technical metrics? These are the ones that really get under the hood of the AI itself, right?
Right. These metrics look at things like the complexity of the explanations generated. And this is really key, how closely those explanations match the AI's actual decision-making process.
So it's kind of like a lie detector test for the AI, making sure its explanation aligns with what it's actually doing.
That's a great analogy. One metric that falls into this category is called performance difference, and it measures how much the explanation's predicted outcome differs from the AI's actual output. The smaller the difference, the more faithful the explanation is to the AI's true reasoning.
I can see how that would be an important check, but I imagine measuring these technical aspects can get pretty complicated, especially with these massive AI models that we're dealing with these days.
It definitely can, and that's, one of the ongoing challenges in the field of XAI. Finding robust and reliable technical metrics is an active area of research.
So we've got all these different metrics, but how do they actually relate back to the AI Act? Does the Act specifically say which metrics we should be using to demonstrate compliance?
That's where things get a little tricky. The Act doesn't prescribe any specific metrics. It lays out these high-level principles of explainability. But it kind of leaves it up to developers to figure out how to meet those requirements in practice.
So it's like they're saying, hey, make sure your AI is explainable, but they're not giving us the ruler to measure it with.
Exactly. And this vagueness, it can be a source of both frustration, opportunity. On the one hand, it creates some uncertainty and makes compliance kind of a moving target.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it allows for some flexibility and encourages innovation in the development of XAI methods.
It sounds like there's a lot of debate surrounding this aspect of the Act. Where do you think things are headed?
Well, one thing is for sure, explainable AI is not going away. This focus on transparency and accountability is only going to grow. The EU's AI Act is definitely a significant step, and it's very likely to influence AI regulation globally.
So even if I'm not directly working with AI systems that fall under this high-risk category, this is still something I need to be paying attention to.
Absolutely. The principles of explainability are really relevant across all applications of AI. As AI becomes more and more integrated into our lives and our work, understanding its decision-making processes is going to be essential for, building trust and ensuring that we're using it responsibly.
It seems like we're at kind of a pivotal moment in the evolution of AI, where we're grappling with not just the technical challenges, but the societal and ethical implications as well. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also a really exciting time to be working in this field. We're shaping the future of AI and making sure that it's a future where humans and AI can collaborate effectively and ethically.
That's a great point. It's not about fearing AI. It's about understanding it and making sure that it's used for good. Before we get into those big picture questions, though, I'm curious about the specific challenges that the AI Act presents for developers. What are some of the practical hurdles that we need to overcome? So we've talked about, what explainable AI is, why it matters, even how to measure it. But now let's get down to like the nitty-gritty, What are the actual real-world challenges that this act creates for someone like you developing AI?
Yeah, you're right. It's time to get practical. And honestly, one of the biggest hurdles is that vagueness we've been talking about this whole time. The Act lays out these, high-level goals for explainability, but doesn't give you a clear roadmap for how to actually get there.
It's like being told to invent a teleportation device without being given any blueprints. I get the concept,
Yeah.
but where do I even begin?
That is a perfect analogy. And this lack of, specific guidelines, it's a real headache for developers. They're left wondering, you know, how explainable is explainable enough? What concrete steps can I take that will satisfy these requirements?
Yeah, I can see how that would lead to a lot of second guessing and uncertainty during that development process.
Exactly. And this uncertainty can actually end up stifling innovation. If you're constantly worried about meeting some unknown standard, you might be less likely to experiment with new and creative approaches.
Right, because you're so focused on checking the boxes.
Right. It's this delicate balance between regulation and progress.
So vagueness is challenge number one. What else are developers struggling with when it comes to trying to implement the Act's requirements?
Another major challenge is the sheer complexity of some of these AI systems. As AI models become more sophisticated, with, millions or even billions of parameters, it becomes incredibly difficult to explain their decision-making process in a way that's understandable to humans, like your patient.
It's like trying to explain quantum physics to a toddler. At some point, the concept is just, way too complex.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this complexity raises some pretty fundamental questions about the limits of explainability. I mean, can we really expect to fully understand the reasoning of an AI? That's potentially more intricate than the human brain.
It really makes you wonder if there's a point where a certain AI just becomes too complex to explain, at least in a way that humans can fully comprehend.
That's definitely a possibility we need to consider. It's important to be realistic about what XAI can and can't do. It's a powerful tool, but it's not a magic wand that's suddenly going to make all AI transparent.
So we've got vagueness, we've got complexity. Any other, major obstacles when it comes to actually putting this AI Act into practice?
One more that's really important to keep in mind is this potential trade-off between explainability and performance. Sometimes making an AI more explainable might actually reduce its accuracy or efficiency.
So it's like choosing between an AI that's, incredibly good at its job, but kind of a black box.
Yeah.
And one that's easier to understand, but maybe not as good at, diagnosing patient conditions, for example.
Yeah.
That's a tough choice.
It is a tough choice, and, the best approach is going to depend on the specific application and what the priorities are.
Right. So in the case of medical diagnosis, obviously accuracy is super important. I want the AI to give me, the most reliable diagnosis possible, even if I don't completely understand every single step in its reasoning.
Exactly. But in other situations, like let's say you were using AI to help determine insurance premiums, well, then explainability might be the higher priority to ensure fairness and transparency.
So each use case is going to present its own set of unique considerations. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to, this balance between explainability and performance.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this field so fascinating and challenging.
Hmm.
It's constantly evolving as we try to grapple with these really complex questions.
So with all of these challenges on the table, what's your key takeaway for, anyone listening as they navigate this new landscape of explainable AI?
The most important thing is to stay informed. The EU's AI Act is a major development, and it's likely to influence AI regulation globally. Even if your current work doesn't fall under that, high-risk category, the principles of explainability are going to become increasingly relevant across all areas of AI development.
So thinking about explainability from the start, baking it into your development process, that's going to be essential going forward.
Absolutely. And it's not just about checking boxes for compliance. It's about approaching AI development responsibly and ethically, building trust with users by making sure they understand how AI is impacting their lives.
It sounds like explainable AI is really about more than just technical transparency. It's about, fostering this sense of collaboration and understanding between humans and AI.
Exactly. And as AI becomes more and more deeply integrated into our world, this kind of partnership is going to be crucial.
This has been a fantastic deep dive. We've covered so much, from the basic concepts of XAI to the practical challenges of implementing the AI Act.
It's been great exploring this with you. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. As AI continues to evolve, so too will our understanding of explainability and all of its implications. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and ever-evolving world of explainable AI.